The evening was filled with golden lights, shining glasses, and soft laughter. The ballroom of the luxury hotel looked like a dream. Men in dark suits and women in sparkling dresses moved from table to table, speaking about business, travel, and expensive things. At the center of it all stood a well-known millionaire, a man who owned several companies and whose name often appeared in newspapers. He was tall, confident, and carried himself with the ease of someone who always got what he wanted. People admired him, not only for his money but also for his sense of humor. He loved to joke, sometimes at his own expense, and sometimes at the expense of others. Among the guests, almost hidden near the back of the room, sat a young woman. She was not rich, she was not famous, and she was not even an invited guest in the usual sense. She worked as an assistant for one of the organizers of the event. Her job was to make sure papers were in place. Guests were comfortable and everything moved smoothly. Nobody paid much attention to her. She wore a plain dress that did not shine under the lights. Her hair was simple, tied neatly, and her hands were folded on her lap as she quietly observed the glamorous world around her. The millionaire noticed her only because he liked to tease people who seemed too quiet. He walked past her table, raised an eyebrow, and asked in a playful tone, "And who are you? Why are you sitting there so silent?" She smiled politely, answering softly that she was just helping with the event. He chuckled, leaned closer, and with a grin said, "Ah, an assistant, do you know what? If you can impress me today, I'll make you CEO of my company." His words made the people standing nearby laugh loudly. It was meant as a joke, a careless promise made only to entertain. The idea of an assistant suddenly becoming the head of a powerful company was ridiculous to everyone listening. Some guests even repeated the words to each other. Finding them funny, the young woman smiled. But she did not laugh as loudly as the others. For a moment, her eyes shone as if she took the words seriously. Though nobody noticed, the atmosphere in the room stayed cheerful. Music played softly in the background. Waiters walked around carrying trays of drinks, and conversations continued about big contracts and overseas trips. But in one small corner of the hall, the words of the millionaire stayed alive. They hung in the air between him and the young woman. She was still sitting calmly, but inside her heart something began to move. She thought about what he said, not as a joke but as a challenge. The millionaire soon walked away, laughing with his group of friends. He did not think about the assistant again. For him, the moment was finished. Another small joke and a night full of chatter. Yet the people around the assistant kept glancing at her, some with curiosity, some with hidden smiles. They wondered if she would respond or just remain invisible. The woman lowered her eyes, pretending not to notice the looks, but her mind was racing. A strange fire had been lit inside her all her life. She had been told to stay quiet, to be polite, to never step too far out of line. But now, even though it was said as a joke, someone had placed a daring idea before her. A promise, even if made in laughter, had power. She felt the room shift, and she felt a chance waiting. It was almost like the universe had whispered to her through the millionaire's careless words. The promise was not real, of course, yet for her, it became a door, a spark, a possibility. She thought of all the times she had hidden her real self, her real talent, because she believed nobody would care. She thought of the piano at home, the one she had learned to play when she was a child. She had left that part of her behind, but suddenly the memory came rushing back. The night moved on, but for her, time slowed. She replayed the millionaire's words again and again in her head. "If you can impress me today, I'll make you CEO of my company." Everyone else had forgotten it already. But she could not. Her heart beat faster. She did not know how or when, but she felt certain that the chance to prove herself would come before the night was over. And when it did, she promised herself she would not let it pass. The ballroom that night looked like a palace. Its walls were covered with golden frames. Long curtains touched the floor, and crystal chandeliers hung from the ceiling, spreading soft light everywhere. Round tables were set with white cloth, shining silver spoons, and glasses filled with sparkling water. The air carried the smell of expensive perfume mixed with the sweetness of fresh flowers. A live band was playing gentle music at the corner, giving the room a graceful atmosphere. The guests were people of wealth and power. Some were CEOs of big companies. Others were investors who controlled millions. Their voices were filled with confidence. Every handshake felt important, every smile was measured. They spoke about money, new projects, and travels around the world. Many of them did not notice the waiters moving quietly among the tables. carrying drinks and food. The waiters, dressed in black and white uniforms, were almost invisible in such a grand gathering. At the back of the hall sat the young woman. Her dress was simple, plain compared to the sparkling gowns of the rich women around her. She was not part of this world. She was there only as an assistant. Her job was to make sure the event ran smoothly, to check small details, to be ready if her employer needed anything. She sat quietly, her hands folded, her eyes observing everything but drawing no attention to herself. People barely looked at her. To them, she was just staff, just another background figure. They did not know her story, her struggles, or her hidden talent. They only saw a young woman with no jewelry, no wealth, and no powerful connections. If they noticed her at all, it was only for a second before turning back to their conversations. The millionaire, on the other hand, was the shining star of the night. He stood near the center of the room, his laughter louder than most, his presence impossible to ignore. Wherever he went, people gathered. Some wanted to shake his hand, others wanted his advice. Many just wanted to be seen near him. He knew his power and he enjoyed it. He often made jokes, and people laughed even when the jokes were not truly funny. They laughed because he was rich. They laughed because they wanted his attention. In one corner of the room stood a grand piano. Its black surface reflected the lights from above. Most guests did not care much about it. They were too busy with food, drinks, and networking. But to the young woman, the piano stood like a silent friend. She had noticed it as soon as she entered the hall. She looked at it again and again, her heart pulling toward it. Her fingers itched with memory, remembering the times she used to play. The music from the live band covered the air. Yet the piano remained untouched. It waited, silent and patient, as if it knew its moment had not yet come. The young woman glanced at it once more, her lips pressing together as if hiding a secret. Around her, conversations grew louder. The millionaire was now surrounded by people telling stories of their success, boasting about profits and business deals. They laughed, raised glasses, and clapped each other on the back. The mood was cheerful but shallow. Everyone wanted to look important. Nobody wanted to look vulnerable. The assistant felt small in the middle of all this glitter, but she also felt calm. She was used to being ignored. She was used to sitting at the edge of the room. Unnoticed, her life had taught her patience. To wait for the right moment instead of pushing forward too quickly. She looked once more at the millionaire. His promise from earlier still echoed in her mind. "If you can impress me today, I'll make you CEO of my company." He had said it with laughter, and the guest had laughed with him. To them, it was just a silly joke. But to her, it was something more. She knew he had not meant it, but she felt that if the chance came, she could prove herself. The hall glowed brighter as more guests arrived. Cameras flashed, reporters whispered notes. People were shaking hands, making plans, promising partnerships. The millionaire moved from one group to another like a king among his people. But somewhere in that crowd, the young woman remained still, waiting, watching, her eyes always returning to that piano in the corner. Every great story begins in silence, and hers was about to awaken. She did not know how, she did not know when, but deep in her heart she felt the night was not ordinary. Something was waiting to happen, something that would change how people looked at her forever. The evening moved forward with music and laughter. The millionaire was now in a lively mood, entertaining his circle with more jokes and clever remarks. His booming voice carried across the hall, and wherever he stood, the energy seemed to follow. He enjoyed being the center of attention, and people enjoyed being near him, because his approval meant influence. At one point, as he laughed with a group of businessmen, his eyes fell once again on the young woman sitting quietly at the edge of the room. He remembered the playful promise he had made earlier, and with a mischievous grin he decided to tease her again. This time, he wanted everyone to enjoy the moment. He gestured toward her and called out loudly enough for nearby guests to hear. "There she is, our future CEO, the one who will lead my company." The words made the people around him burst into laughter. Some turned their heads to look at her, whispering to each other with amused expressions. The young woman smiled nervously, trying not to show discomfort. She lowered her gaze, but her heart beat faster. Then one of the guests pointed toward the grand piano standing silently in the corner. "Why don't you prove yourself right now?" the guest suggested with a playful tone. "Go on, play something. Impress us all." The idea caught on quickly, and people began nodding and chuckling. They loved the thought of seeing the quiet assistant placed in the spotlight. For them, it was just entertainment, a little fun to spice up the evening. The millionaire raised his eyebrow, his grin growing wider. "Yes, that's it," he said loudly. "Show us what you can do. Play that piano and who knows, maybe you'll earn that CEO chair." Again, the crowd erupted in laughter. Some clapped their hands, encouraging the idea as if it were a game. To them, it was harmless teasing, a chance to laugh at someone unexpected. The woman felt all eyes on her. Her cheeks warmed, and her hands trembled slightly. She had not expected this moment. Yet here it was, her mind raced with questions. Should she refuse politely, smile and stay in her place? Or should she stand up and walk toward the piano, risking humiliation? The safe choice would be to shake her head and let the crowd move on to another joke. That way she would stay invisible, protected, unnoticed. But something inside her refused to let go of the chance. She remembered the promise, even though it was made as a joke. She remembered the fire in her heart when she first heard it. She thought of all the years she had kept her talent hidden, never daring to share it with the world. This was not just a moment of teasing. It was a door, and if she let it close, it might never open again. The piano stood quietly, waiting. It was more than an instrument to her. It was a voice she had silenced for too long. She remembered the nights when she practiced for hours, when music carried her through sadness and hope. She remembered the joy of creating sound that touched the soul, and suddenly she felt that power returning. The millionaire smirked, thinking she would refuse. He expected her to blush, shake her head, and hide behind her role as an assistant. That was what everyone else expected too. They thought she would back away, giving them another reason to laugh. Instead, she slowly stood from her chair. The movement was small, but it changed the air in the room. The laughter softened, replaced by curious silence. Her steps were steady as she walked toward the grand piano. Every eye followed her and every whisper stopped. The millionaire crossed his arms, amused but surprised. He did not think she would actually do it. "Well, well," he said loudly. "Let's see what our future CEO can do." His words carried a teasing edge, but even he was now intrigued. The assistant placed her hand gently on the polished surface of the piano. Taking a deep breath, the challenge had been made. The crowd expected a joke, a small attempt, maybe a clumsy tune that would make them laugh again. They had no idea what was about to come. The room grew quiet as she pulled out the piano bench and sat down. The lights from above reflected on the polished black surface of the piano, making it shine like a jewel in the middle of the hall. People leaned slightly forward in their seats, curious about what she was going to do. Some guests had half smiles, ready to laugh if she failed. Others looked at her with mild pity, certain she was about to embarrass herself. The young woman placed her hands gently on her lap. She took a deep breath, closing her eyes for a moment. The sound of laughter and whispers faded from her mind. She tried to remember the countless evenings of her childhood when she practiced on a small piano at home. She remembered her mother listening from the kitchen, clapping softly whenever she finished a song. Those memories gave her courage now. The millionaire tilted his head with amusement. His grin showed he was enjoying the show already. To him, this was still just a game. He expected her to press a few wrong keys, perhaps stumble through a tune and then laugh it off. It would give him and the guests another story to tell later. He tapped his glass with his finger, waiting. Finally, the woman lifted her hands and placed her fingers lightly on the keys. The crowd held its breath. The first note came, soft and clear, floating into the room like a whisper. Then another note followed, and another. The sound was delicate but steady. She began with a slow melody, a simple tune that carried grace in every touch. The whispers in the room stopped. People leaned even closer, surprised that the sound was not clumsy or broken, but smooth and beautiful. A few raised their eyebrows, exchanging glances. This was not what they had expected. The notes began to connect, flowing into one another, forming a gentle rhythm that seemed to calm the air. The young woman felt her fear begin to melt away. The piano responded to her touch like an old friend. Her fingers grew more confident. She moved from slow notes to slightly faster ones, weaving a melody that spoke of both sorrow and hope. It was not just music, it was her heart speaking through sound. Every stroke of her fingers carried emotion. The millionaire leaned back slightly, his smile fading just a little. He had expected entertainment, but he had not expected this. He glanced at the guests around him, noticing their faces changing from amusement to astonishment. A silence spread across the room, the kind of silence that meant everyone was listening deeply. As the tune grew richer, the atmosphere of the hall shifted. The clinking of glasses stopped. Conversations died out completely. Waiters paused in their steps, holding trays mid-air. It was as if the entire room had been caught in a spell. And the spell was woven by the young woman sitting at the piano. She closed her eyes again as she played. Her body moved gently with the rhythm. Every note carried confidence now. Every chord painted colors in the minds of the listeners. She had forgotten the millionaire's smirk, forgotten the sharp eyes of the crowd. At this moment, it was only her and the music. For years she had kept this part of herself hidden, never showing it in public, never believing that anyone would care, but now, under the heavy lights of the grand hall, surrounded by the powerful and the wealthy, her music finally had a voice, and the voice was stronger than she ever imagined. The millionaire uncrossed his arms. For the first time that night, he was not laughing, he was listening. His eyes followed her hands as they moved gracefully over the keys. He saw something in her he had not expected, a quiet strength, a confidence born not of money but of passion. It unsettled him, but it also fascinated him. Guests began to shift in their seats, their expressions softening. Some were wide-eyed, others nodded slowly in appreciation. Nobody laughed anymore, nobody whispered. The only sound in the room was the rise and fall of the piano. Filling every corner with beauty, the assistant herself felt transformed. She was no longer the invisible girl in the corner. She was no longer the quiet helper. She was a performer, an artist, a woman who could hold the attention of an entire room. The power she felt was not arrogance but freedom, the kind of freedom that comes when someone finally dares to show their true self. When the last note of her first piece ended, the sound hung in the air for a moment, soft and fading like the echo of a dream. The room stayed silent, frozen in awe. It was a silence more powerful than any applause. It meant that every single person had been touched. Even if they did not want to admit it, the first song had ended. But the young woman did not lift her hands away from the keys. The room was silent, but inside her, a storm of courage and passion was rising. She took a deep breath, and without waiting for anyone's approval, she began to play again. This time the notes came faster, sharper, more alive. The melody grew into something larger. The simple tune of before now turned into a dance of keys. Her fingers moved quickly, almost like they were flying. Every sound was strong, full of energy. The piano sang with her, carrying not just music but fire. The audience, who had first looked at her with doubt, now stared in amazement. Their eyes widened as the soft assistant they barely noticed turned into a powerful performer before them. Her back straightened, her shoulders no longer small and shy. Her face glowed with confidence as she let the music flow. It was like watching someone transform from a shadow into a shining light. The millionaire leaned forward. His playful smirk had disappeared. In its place was an expression he rarely wore: respect. He could not believe what he was hearing. He had been surrounded by powerful people all his life, people with money, status, and influence. Yet in that moment, he realized none of them could command a room the way she did with her piano. The music shifted again. She moved from classical to playful jazz-like improvisations. The guests gasped softly, unable to hide their surprise. The sound was no longer just skillful. It was joyful. Her music seemed to tell a story, one that pulled everyone into it. Some felt it as a story of struggle. Others felt it as hope, but all of them felt it deeply. The assistant herself felt new energy running through her. This was not just playing, this was freedom. For years she had kept this gift hidden, locked away in small rooms where no one could see. But tonight, in this hall full of power and wealth, her gift had finally broken free. She realized she did not need money or position to be seen. All she needed was to be herself. The transformation was not only inside her, it was in the room itself. The guests, who had been laughing and whispering earlier, now sat frozen. Their drinks remained untouched, their words forgotten. The waiters stood still, the cameras lowered. The music had captured them all for the young woman. The piano was no longer an instrument. It was her voice, her truth, her way of showing the world who she really was. She pressed harder on the keys and the sound filled every corner of the hall. People could feel the walls vibrate, as if even the building itself was listening. The millionaire rubbed his chin slowly. He could feel something shift inside him too. He was used to controlling every room he walked into. Yet here he was no longer in control. The assistant, whom he had teased as a joke, had taken that power without asking. She had done it not with words or money, but with pure talent. The crowd began to breathe differently. Some leaned back in their chairs as if the music pushed them. Others leaned forward as if pulled closer by invisible strings. One woman pressed her hand to her chest, another wiped the corner of her eye. Nobody could escape what they were feeling. The assistant's music had reached them in places their wealth never touched. The young woman could sense it. She felt their energy change. She knew now that she had them. She was no longer invisible. She was no longer just the assistant at the back of the hall. She was the one everyone was watching. The one everyone would remember. The transformation was complete. Not just for her, but for the entire room. The laughter of earlier had been replaced by awe. The indifference had been replaced by admiration. And the millionaire's careless challenge had turned into a serious moment he could not ignore. When she slowed the music and brought it back to a gentle finish, the final notes echoed softly like whispers. This time the silence that followed was heavier. It was not the silence of doubt, but of shock. Everyone knew they had witnessed something rare, something real, and in that silence, the young woman finally lifted her hands from the keys. She did not bow, she did not smile. She simply sat there, breathing slowly, letting the moment settle. The girl who had walked in as nobody had now become the brightest presence in the room. For a few long seconds, the hall remained completely silent. The music had ended, but its echo still hung in the air like a soft shadow. The young woman sat still at the piano, her hands resting gently on her lap. Her chest rose and fell slowly as she caught her breath. She did not look at anyone, but she could feel every pair of eyes fixed on her. The guests who had been ready to laugh earlier now stared in disbelief. They had expected a weak attempt, maybe a broken tune, but instead, they had been given a performance they would never forget. The silence was heavy, yet it was not empty. It was filled with wonder, respect, and even something close to fear. Then, as if the spell finally broke, a single person clapped. It was a sharp sound, quick and loud in the quiet hall. All heads turned toward the source, and then another person joined, and then another soon. The hall filled with applause, soft at first, then louder and louder until it became thunder. People rose from their chairs. Some clapped with wide smiles. Others clapped with tears shining in their eyes. A few guests even whistled, unable to hold back their excitement. The applause rolled like waves, growing stronger, filling every corner of the hall. It was no longer the polite clapping given at social events. It was real, heartfelt, unstoppable. The young woman finally lifted her head. Her eyes met the crowd, and she saw faces that had completely changed. The same people who once looked past her now looked at her as if she were the only person in the room. She felt her heart swell with a strange mix of relief and pride. For the first time in her life, she was not invisible. Phones came out of pockets and handbags. Some guests quickly began recording, capturing the moment so they could show others later. A few whispered excitedly to each other, "Who is she? Where did she come from? How could we not know her talent?" Their voices carried both surprise and admiration. Even the waiters who had been frozen before now joined in with smiles. They clapped along with the crowd, happy to see someone from the invisible side of the room step into the light. For them, it was more than just music. It was a reminder that greatness could come from anywhere. The millionaire himself stood up slowly. His face was unreadable for a moment, but then he began to clap too, louder than anyone else. He nodded his head with approval. Though deep inside he was shocked, he had made a joke. Yet that joke had led to this powerful moment. He felt humbled, even if he did not show it openly. The applause went on and on. It was not just about the music anymore. It was about the transformation they had all witnessed. A quiet assistant had turned into the star of the night. Someone they had dismissed had forced them to see her. Not with money, not with position, but with pure talent. Some of the women in the room wiped their eyes, touched by the beauty of the performance. Some of the men shook their heads in disbelief, unable to accept how wrong they had been to underestimate her. Yet none of them could deny the truth of what they had seen and heard. The young woman stood slowly from the piano bench. She bowed her head lightly, her expression calm but her heart racing inside. She did not need to say a word. Her silence spoke louder than anything she could have said. She had already told her story through music, and the crowd had listened. People began moving closer. A few stepped forward, eager to speak to her, eager to ask her name, eager to connect with her in a hall full of powerful people. She had suddenly become the most sought-after presence. The crowd that once ignored her now could not get enough of her. The millionaire raised his glass with a smile. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, "I think we have just witnessed something extraordinary." His voice carried across the room, and though he tried to keep it playful, there was a seriousness in his tone that everyone felt. For the first time that night, he was not the center of attention. She was. The applause softened. But the admiration stayed in the air. Conversations started again, but they were no longer about business deals or money. They were all about her. Everyone wanted to know who she was. Everyone wanted to remember this night, and in the middle of it all, the young woman stood by the piano, her plain dress still simple, her hair still neat, but she was no longer the invisible assistant. She was someone unforgettable, someone who had changed the room with nothing more than music. The applause slowly faded, but the energy in the room did not. The guests were still buzzing with excitement, speaking in low voices, glancing at the young woman as if they were afraid to blink and miss her. She stood quietly by the piano, her hands resting calmly, her heart still beating fast, but in that moment, she no longer looked like an assistant. She looked like someone greater, someone who had claimed the entire room without asking for it. The millionaire watched her closely for the first time in a very long time. He was not the one commanding attention. He had built his life on power, money, and charm. He had always been the loudest laugh, the sharpest voice, the strongest presence, yet now, standing in the center of his own event, he realized the spotlight had moved away from him. It had moved to the quiet young woman he had once ignored. He replayed the moment in his mind, the way she had sat at the back of the room, unnoticed by anyone, the way he had teased her with that careless promise, the way the crowd had laughed at his words. It had all been a game to him, a joke meant to entertain. But now he saw how wrong he had been. His promise may have been born from humor, but her response had been born from courage. The millionaire felt something stir inside him, something he had not felt in years. It was respect, true respect, not the kind that came from fear or money, but the kind that is earned by greatness. He thought about all the CEOs, the investors, the leaders he had met. Not many of them could silence a room the way she just had. Not many of them could inspire people with nothing but their presence. She had done it with music, but it was more than that. She had done it with heart. He smiled faintly, shaking his head at himself. He had always believed that leadership was about control, about power, about making people listen, yet tonight, this young woman had shown him something different. Leadership could also come from inspiration, from truth, from the ability to touch others deeply, and that he realized was a far greater power. The crowd began whispering again. Some guests were already talking about her talent, suggesting she should perform at bigger events. Some wanted to introduce her to important people. A few even spoke about opportunities, scholarships or sponsorships. The millionaire listened, but he knew none of them truly understood what he had just seen. They saw talent, yes, but he saw something more. He saw potential. He looked at her again, standing tall by the piano, calm and collected. She was not begging for attention. She was not chasing anyone's approval. She was simply herself. That kind of confidence could not be bought. It could not be faked. It was real, and that was what made it powerful. For a moment, he felt humbled. He, the man who had built empires, was now learning a lesson from someone who had no wealth, no title, no recognition. He realized his joke about making her a CEO did not sound so foolish anymore. Of course, he would not hand her a company overnight. But he knew she had something that even his best executives lacked. She had the ability to inspire, to surprise, to lead without even trying. He raised his glass again, this time not as a joke, but as a sign of respect. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said with a voice that carried more weight than before, "what you have witnessed tonight is not just music, it is leadership, it is courage. And it is a reminder that greatness does not always come from titles or money." The room grew quiet again. Listening to him, his words were softer now, but they carried truth. The young woman looked at him. Surprised, she had expected laughter, perhaps another joke. Instead, she saw sincerity in his eyes for the first time. He looked at her not as an assistant, not as a nobody, but as an equal. That look meant more to her than the applause. Inside, the millionaire made a silent decision. He would no longer underestimate people based on their position or appearance. He would remember this night, not as the night he entertained his guests with a joke, but as the night he himself had been taught a lesson, and the teacher had been someone nobody else had believed in. The realization sank deeper with every passing second. He thought about his companies, his boardrooms, his meetings filled with serious faces and heavy words. How many people in those rooms truly inspired him? How many of them could win hearts? Not just numbers, very few, he admitted to himself. And certainly none had the presence she had shown tonight. The hall was alive with chatter again, but his mind was quiet. He knew he had witnessed something rare, something precious, and he knew that the promise he had made in jest now carried a strange weight. It was not about giving her a title, but about recognizing her worth, about giving her the chance she deserved. As the night continued, he kept glancing at her, watching the way people now surrounded her, asking questions, praising her, admiring her. And each time he looked, the same thought came back. She may not be his CEO, but she had already proven herself a leader. She had done it in the most unexpected way, and that was something he would never forget. The night slowly came to an end, but the memory of her music stayed alive in the room. Guests were still talking about her performance, their voices full of amazement. Some replayed the video clips on their phones, showing others what they had captured. They shook their heads, still surprised that the quiet assistant had become the star of the evening. The young woman stood near the piano. Unsure of what to do, she had not planned any of this. She had only followed her heart. Now she was surrounded by people she had never spoken to before. People who once ignored her now wanted to know her name. Her story, her dreams, she answered politely. Still shy, but inside her, something had changed forever. The millionaire walked toward her. His usual playful smile was gone, replaced by something calmer. He looked at her with genuine respect. "You have a gift," he said softly, loud enough for her to hear, but not for the whole crowd. "Tonight you showed us more than music. You showed us strength." She lowered her eyes, unsure how to respond. For her, those words meant more than the grand promise he had made earlier. He did not repeat his joke about making her CEO, but he knew, and she knew, that something real had happened between them. She had proven herself not through business skills or wealth, but through authenticity, and in his heart, the millionaire decided he would help her find the opportunities she deserved, even if she never worked in his company. He would make sure her talent did not go unseen again. As the guests began leaving the hall, many stopped to shake her hand. Some gave her their cards, offering connections. Others simply told her how much her music had moved them. For a woman who had walked into the night invisible, this sudden attention felt overwhelming. Yet it also felt right. She had not asked for it, but she had earned it. When the lights of the ballroom dimmed, and the last of the laughter faded into the night, she finally stepped outside. The cool air touched her face, and she looked up at the sky. The stars seemed brighter than usual. Her heart was full, not because of the applause, but because she had finally dared to show who she was. Walking home, she thought about everything. For so long she had doubted herself, hiding her music as if it was unimportant. Tonight had proven otherwise. She understood now that her talent was her power, a power stronger than money or position. She realized she did not need anyone's permission to shine. All she needed was courage. The next day, the story of the night spread quickly. Guests shared videos online. People who had not been at the party began to hear about the assistant who had stunned a millionaire's crowd. Messages poured in, and people wanted to know more about her. Her life, which once felt ordinary and unnoticed, was suddenly filled with new doors waiting to open. She did not become a CEO, but she became something else. She became an inspiration, a reminder that talent can hide in the quietest corners, waiting for the right moment to be seen, a reminder that one person's joke can turn into another person's chance to rise. The millionaire also carried the memory of that night with him. In his meetings and in his decisions, he often thought back to her performance. He told the story to his friends and colleagues not as a joke anymore, but as a lesson. He spoke about how leadership is not always about power. Sometimes it is about courage, about showing your true self without fear. For the young woman, life was never the same again. She began to perform at small events, each one bigger than the last. People who once overlooked her now admired her. Opportunities she never dreamed of came knocking at her door. And through it all, she remained humble, remembering that she had once been invisible, and that her music had given her a voice. The night of the charity dinner became a turning point. It was the night she stopped being just an assistant, the night she stopped hiding her gift. It was the night the world finally saw her, and though the millionaire had spoken in jest, His promise had carried her to a stage far brighter than any company title. In the end, she learned that sometimes life changes not through careful planning, but through a single unexpected moment, a moment when courage meets opportunity, a moment when you dare to step forward instead of staying in the shadows. That was her moment, and she took it. And because of that, she was never forgotten.